Can you picture yourself tied to a mast, salt spray stinging your wounds while the cat-o'-nine-tails whistles through the air behind you? The crack of leather against raw flesh echoes across the deck as 200 men watch in terrified silence, knowing they could be next. This is the brutal reality of punishment aboard colonial ships, where discipline meant survival and mercy was a luxury captains couldn't afford. Subscribe now and discover why even the strongest men broke within hours under these merciless maritime punishments. Feel the rough hemp rope cutting into your wrists as you're dragged before the ship's company at dawn. The morning. Air carries the stench of unwashed bodies, rotting wood and fear-soaked sweat. Around you, hollow-eyed sailors form a circle, their faces carved with the same terror that now grips your chest. The captain's voice cuts through the silence like a blade, reading charges that could mean anything from 50 lashes to death itself. In the 16th century, a single act of insubordination carried punishments that would be considered torture today. Your heart pounds against your ribs like a caged animal, and the real horror hasn't even begun. Observe how the boatswain's mate prepares his instruments with the methodical precision of a butcher. The cat-o'-nine-tails hangs from his thick fingers, 9 leather strands each tipped with metal fragments designed to tear flesh from bone. He tests the weight, flexes his shoulders, and positions himself at the regulation distance of 6 feet. Spanish naval records from 1580 document that the standard lashing contained bone fragments and glass, shards woven into the leather tips. The crew watches in dead silence as he raises his arm. Every man knows that sound will haunt their dreams. Contemplate the first strike as it lands across your bare back with the force of a cannon blast. The leather strands wrap around your torso like serpents, each tip finding purchase in your skin before ripping away chunks of flesh. Blood spatters the deck planks, already stained dark from countless previous punishments. The pain explodes through your nervous system, white-hot and absolute, scrambling your ability to think or breathe. Portuguese maritime law required that lashings be administered slowly, with 10-second intervals between strikes to maximize psychological impact. The metallic taste of blood fills your mouth as you bite through your own tongue, but 24 more lashes still await. Recognize how your body begins its desperate attempts at self-preservation after the 5th strike. Muscles spasm uncontrollably, trying to twist away from the next blow that you know is coming. Your vision blurs as shock sets in, the brain's merciful attempt to disconnect from trauma too severe to process. Sweat mixes with blood, creating a slippery mess that makes maintaining your grip on the mast nearly impossible. English naval regulations from 1623 specified that men who collapsed during punishment would be revived with seawater and forced to complete their sentence. The deck beneath your feet grows slick with your own fluids, and this is still considered a minor punishment. Visualize the psychological warfare that accompanies every physical blow. Between strikes, the silence stretches like an eternity while you wait for the next explosion of agony. Your mind fractures between desperate hope that it's over and the crushing certainty that it's not. Around you, shipmates who laughed with you yesterday now stand frozen, calculating whether their own recent infractions might earn them the same fate. French privateering records show that witnessing punishments caused as many psychological casualties as receiving them, with men throwing themselves overboard rather than endure the anticipation. The cat-o'-nine-tails whistles through salt air once more. Your sanity starts to crack like old wood. Listen to the sounds that fill the maritime hell surrounding you as punishment continues. The snap of leather against flesh creates a rhythm that synchronizes with your heartbeat and breathing until they become one terrible percussion. Men cough nervously, boots shuffle against wooden planks, and rigging creaks overhead like the soundtrack to your destruction. But loudest of all is your own voice, raw from screaming prayers and curses that blend together into meaningless noise. Dutch colonial records indicate that prolonged lashing often caused men to lose their voices permanently, leaving them mute for the remainder of their service. The ocean itself seems to hold its breath, as if even nature recoils from human cruelty. Perceive how time distorts under extreme physical trauma, minutes stretching into hours, while seconds compress into flashes of overwhelming sensation. Your back feels like raw meat exposed to winter wind, every nerve-ending firing simultaneously in a symphony of agony that drowns out all other thought. Blood loss begins affecting your vision, turning the world into a hazy red tunnel focused solely on surviving the next second. Maritime medical texts from the era describe victims entering a trance-like state where reality becomes fluid and hallucinations begin. The 13th lash opens wounds that will never fully heal. But the bosun's mate shows no signs of fatigue. If you think these punishments were reserved for the worst criminals, think again. Even minor infractions could earn similar treatment. Subscribe to this channel for more brutal historical truths that reveal how truly harsh life was before modern civilization. Share this video with anyone who thinks they're tough enough to handle the colonial maritime world, because the reality will shock them. Understand that flogging was just the appetizer in the feast of colonial naval punishment. For more serious offenses, men faced keel hauling, being dragged underwater along the barnacle-encrusted bottom of the ship while holding their breath. The razor-sharp marine growth would strip flesh from bone, while salt water burned the exposed muscle underneath. Survivors often lost limbs to infection or bled to death from the countless lacerations. Spanish galleon logs from 1634 record that fewer than 30% of men subjected to keel hauling lived to see the next sunrise. Those who did were often left permanently disfigured. The anticipation of this punishment drove more men insane than the punishment itself. Analyze the deliberate psychological cruelty embedded in the maritime justice system of the colonial era. Punishments were scheduled at dawn, ensuring victims spent the entire night in terror, listening to every creak of the ship and imagining the pain to come. Men would be forced to witness the preparation of their own torture devices, watching as crew members tested ropes, sharpened metal fragments, and measured out the regulation tools of agony. Prison ships carried detailed manuals describing exactly how each punishment should be administered for maximum effect and minimum chance of immediate death. The goal wasn't quick justice, it was slow-burning terror. Every sailor lived in constant fear of making even the smallest mistake. Confront the reality that colonial ship captains had absolute power over life and death, operating as judge, jury, and executioner, thousands of miles from any oversight. A captain's word was literally law, and his mood could determine whether a minor offense earned a warning or a death sentence. Marooning, being abandoned on a deserted island with minimal supplies, was considered merciful compared to some alternatives. Men begged to be shot rather than face the slower deaths that maritime punishment could inflict. Records from English colonial archives show that captains who showed too much mercy were often removed from command for being too soft to maintain order. The ocean became a lawless realm where human dignity went to die. Discover how the infamous spread eagle punishment combined physical agony with public humiliation in ways designed to break a man's spirit completely. Victims were tied spread eagle to the rigging, exposed to sun, salt spray, and the elements for days at a time. Without being able to move, men would soil themselves repeatedly, while the crew was forced to watch and work around their suspended bodies. Dehydration and exposure would cause hallucinations, delirium, and often death. Portuguese naval records describe men begging to be cut down and shot rather than endure another day of this particular torture. The psychological damage often lasted longer than the physical wounds. Many survivors never spoke again. Recollect that even medical treatment was turned into additional punishment for those who had earned the captain's displeasure. Ship's surgeons would deliberately use dirty instruments, pour salt into wounds, or amputate limbs without any pain relief as forms of extended torture. Men who survived the initial punishment often died later from infections that could have been prevented with basic care. The ship's medical bay became a chamber of horrors where healing and harm blended together in deliberate cruelty. Colonial maritime medical logs show that survival rates for punished crew members were 60% lower than for those receiving standard medical care. Recovery meant nothing if you weren't meant to recover. Evaluate the systematic dehumanization that made such cruelty possible aboard colonial vessels. Sailors were literally treated as property, bought, sold, and discarded based solely on their usefulness to the voyage. A man's value was measured only in his ability to work, fight, and follow orders without question. Those who showed weakness, illness, or independent thought were seen as threats to ship discipline and dealt with accordingly. Maritime law classified sailors somewhere between livestock and tools, with corresponding legal protections. Breaking a man's spirit was considered necessary maintenance. Captains who developed reputations for excessive cruelty often found their recruitment easier, as word spread that only the most obedient men survived their voyages. Confront the horrifying efficiency with which colonial maritime punishment was designed to maximize suffering while preserving the victim's ability to continue working. Lashings were calculated to cause maximum pain without immediately disabling the recipient. Men were expected to return to duty immediately after punishment, often with their backs still bleeding through hastily applied bandages. The message was clear: you are nothing more than a tool, and damaged tools must continue functioning until they break completely. Ship logs record instances of men collapsing at their posts days after punishment, dying quietly while still attempting to fulfill their duties. The colonial maritime world had perfected the art of extracting maximum labor from human suffering. Descubra, the ultimate punishment that waited for those who committed the gravest offenses, being sewn into a canvas sack with cannonballs and thrown overboard while still alive. This execution method, known as deep-sixing, ensured a slow, terrifying death as victims sank conscious into the crushing depths of the ocean. The weight of the cannonballs would pull them down slowly enough to experience every moment of drowning while being squeezed by increasing water pressure. Colonial naval records suggest this punishment was designed to send a message that some crimes deserved a hell worse than death. Witnesses described hearing screams that seemed to come from beneath the ship long after the condemned had disappeared. Even the most hardened sailors would weep openly when this sentence was carried out. Conclude that you, comfortable in your modern world of human rights, legal protections, and basic human dignity, would not have lasted 24 hours in this floating nightmare of colonial maritime justice. These men lived every day knowing that a single wrong word, a moment of weakness, or even bad luck, could result in torture that would make medieval dungeons seem merciful by comparison. They endured not because they were superhuman, but because they had no choice. The ocean offered no escape, no appeal, no mercy. The colonial maritime world was a realm where human cruelty reached depths as dark as the waters that surrounded these wooden prisons. Every sunrise brought new opportunities for suffering, and every sunset left survivors grateful simply to be alive. These weren't just punishments. They were systematic destruction of the human spirit, carried out with the efficiency of men who had learned to see suffering as just another tool of maritime management. The next time you complain about your job, your boss, or your living conditions, remember these forgotten men who endured hell on earth just to keep the colonial world connected. Their sacrifice built the foundation of global trade and exploration, paid for in blood, pain, and broken spirits. We owe it to their memory to understand not just the glory of the age of exploration, but the human cost that made it possible. Leave a comment below if you think you could have survived even one day under these conditions, or if this video changed how you think about the colonial era. The truth of history is often uglier than the legends, but it's truth nonetheless. Don't forget to watch the video and playlist that will appear on your screen.